Welcome to Romans chapter 5.
Good job, Arlo.
Thank you, Arlo. Good job. Romans chapter 5. And I know I keep repeating the context, but it's so important that we understand who writes this, when he's writing it, and who he's writing it to, because that sheds so much light as to why this letter, the book of Romans, is important. So Paul is the author. Julius, what was Paul?
A devout Jew.
A devout Jew. Now that context is important because he's writing to the church in Rome. There's two groups of people that make up this church. Arlo, who are the two groups?
The Jews and the Gentiles.
Yes, the Jews and the Gentiles. Exactly right. Now, Winston, what's an important detail about the Jews?
They knew the Hebrew Bible like the back of their hand.
Yes, these Jews, they know the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, like the back of their hand.
Yeah.
So if you're Paul and you are trying to resonate with your audience, you have to find a way to relate. You've got the Jews, they know the Hebrew Bible. So that's why in chapter 4, you've got Paul that goes back and he references Abraham and that whole story. Well, now in chapter 5, we find Paul doing the same thing. He goes back again to the book of Genesis. That's because you've got the Jews. They know the Hebrew Bible very, very well. So the stuff he's sharing with them, it's resonating. It makes sense. The dots are being connected. Meanwhile, it's twofold because you've got the Gentiles, and Paul uses this as an opportunity to try to bring them up to speed, to make sure he's educating them, because knowledge leads to conviction. Conviction will lead to action. So it's important that the Gentiles understand the history, that they understand the Old Testament. So he starts out by sharing the story of Adam. Now, God creates Adam, and what's the one thing that God instructs Adam not to do, Julius?
Do not eat from the tree of good and knowledge.
Yes. No, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yes. So you have Adam, who's in the Garden of Eden. God has placed him there. And he says, you enjoy whatever you'd like is yours. There's just one rule. Don't go and take from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What does Adam end up doing?
Doing it.
He disobeys God. He chooses his own authority over God's authority. That one lack of obedience ends up resulting in sin. Sin equals death.
Yep.
Now, you've got Adam who chooses his own authority. He sins. That results in death. 4,000 years later, God walks the earth as Jesus. Jesus is crucified. He sheds his blood. The blood that he sheds ends up being the blood that cleanses each one of us of all of our sin. That blood that was shed provides salvation. And guess what? Guess what happens to death? Death is overcome by eternal life through Jesus Christ. That's what Paul is trying to get across. The Old Testament, once again, comes full circle in the New Testament. Paul wants his crowd, wants the audience, wants the church in Rome to understand that when we disobey, that is sin that leads to death. But thank goodness we've got Jesus. And then when we choose Jesus, we receive salvation, we receive forgiveness, and we receive the gift of eternal life. That's all of Romans chapter 5. You guys did amazing. You guys obviously paid attention this entire week. Hey, Arlo, I'm really impressed with you, buddy. You did the introduction and you remembered the two groups of people, the Jews and the Gentiles. Good job. Next week, we'll do Romans chapter 6.